Welcome, welcome, welcome those of you who are at mochurch.tv. Welcome, good to have you. Hope you come hang out with us in person sometime because these people are pretty. They're really pretty and you're missing it all right there. All you're seeing is me and I am king pretty around here, but these guys are pretty too, okay? So happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Isn't it crazy? It's every year. It's always like, isn't it crazy? It's Thanksgiving. I think it's because it was 95 degrees in September and Thanksgiving's like a week earlier this year, but it just feels nuts that we're about to get fat on Thursday. That just feels crazy. So happy Thanksgiving. Hope the best for you with your friends and family over this holiday, that you travel safe and all that stuff, even if you're just traveling to Parma, okay? Safe travels for you. All right, so we're going to jump right into this. If you grab a paperback Bible, turn to Luke 17, which in the House Bibles is page 850, or you can bust out a Bible app. So jumping right into it, the Bible says that we have a spiritual enemy whose name is Satan. You call him the devil, all kinds of different things you can call him. But the Bible says that he lays traps for people, and that some people get caught in those traps. 2 Timothy 2:26 talks about escaping from the trap of the devil. And anyone who knows anything about hunting or trapping, which is not me, okay? That's not my thing. But if you know anything about that, you know that a trap needs one of two things to be effective. It either needs to be, one, hidden so that the animal will stumble upon it, or number two, it needs to be baited so that it can lure the animal into the trap's deadly jaws. And so Satan's traps are often both of those. They're often hidden and baited. I mean, Satan is shrewd, he's cunning, he's wise and crafty. And a couple years ago, I was reading a book, and I like to be a straight shooter, and I'm going to tell you up front, I wouldn't recommend this book. I just think it's super churchy, just filled with church jargon. I didn't think it was super well written, but there was something at the very beginning of it that was very practical to me. And I've really been trying to put this into practice over the last couple of years. And one of the things that the author said, it's a book called The Bait of Satan. It's by a guy named John Bevere. And he said, one of Satan's most deceptive and insidious kinds of bait is something every person has encountered called offense. Okay? So it's this idea that offense is actually a baited trap that Satan uses to capture us, trap us, imprison us. And so whether people say no offense or not, Satan is going to try to use this thing called offense as a bait to trap you into becoming an offended person, someone who's carrying unforgiveness, and therefore you're trapped. And offended people, they become wounded prisoners, trapped by Satan. And so these offended people, they can easily then be infected with hurt and anger and outrage and jealousy and resentment and strife and bitterness and hatred and envy. I mean, it just goes on and on. And often people who are offended don't even realize that they're trapped. They're oblivious to their condition because they're so focused on the wrong that was done to them. You'll often hear them say, but you don't understand what he did. You don't understand the way she made me feel. You don't understand how humiliated. And they just focus so much on what was done to them that they don't even realize that they've taken the bait of offense and they're stuck, they're trapped. And so if you look at chapter 17 out of Luke, we're in the third week of our F-bomb series, which is about forgiveness. It's about forgiving others. We've been encouraging people to drop the F-bomb on each other, which is forgiveness. And in Luke 17, verse 1, Jesus said to his students, his disciples, things that cause people to stumble are bound to come. Okay? This is a very realist kind of teaching. Okay? Things that cause people to stumble, they're bound to come. In fact, if you've ever had something translated to you from another language, Spanish or anything like that, there's different ways in English you can translate and convey it. And it means the same thing, but there's just different ways to say that thing. That's why we have different English translations of the Bible. And so in the old New King James Version, there's something for you. In the New King James Version, it says this, pow. See what I did there? That's my power. So Jesus said to his disciples, things that cause people to stumble, or stumbling blocks is another translation, are bound to come. So things that cause people to stumble are bound to come. It's impossible that no offenses should come, is what the New King James says. And the original language of Greek, which this was written in, it's funny that the word offenses in that verse, or stumbling blocks, or things that cause people to stumble, the word is scandalon, which is where we get the English word scandal. Okay, it's politics, church word. You know, when there's a scandal in the church, a scandal in politics. We don't know anything about that right now in politics, do we? Nothing like scandal or anything like that. So it was a metaphor that was used to describe a stumbling block, or also translated a rock of offense, something that was placed in front of you as something that could trip you up. It was a snare or a trap for an enemy. And basically it's a metaphor for a behavior or attitude that could lead another person to morally stumble or sin or into some destructive behavior. And so that's what the word was used to describe. So an offense is a snare or a trap or a stumbling block. And so here, Jesus is warning you that offenses will inevitably come your way. Period. Just expect that you are going to have the opportunity often to be offended at what others do or say to you. I see shock on your faces. No, okay? It's just that's the world we live in, okay? And that's the deal. Now, I don't know if you've ever been an offender bender, but a funny thing about this is you could be an offender bender. You could stop at a red light and someone hits you at 10 miles, 15 miles per hour, and you can get whiplash from that fender bender. And it's not because the power, the force was so strong. It's not that at all. It could be 10 or 15 miles per hour. You could hurt for months, years from this fender bender. But it was just a little hit, but the deal with it was you weren't expecting it. And that's kind of the deal with offense, is sometimes people offend you, and one of the reasons it jars you so much is because you didn't even see it coming in this moment. You're like, whoa, that came out of nowhere, that complete insult. That way that someone said something about a person that I love or care about, I didn't even see it coming, and it jarred me. And the effects go on for months and years, and you're offended. And Jesus says, here's the deal. This will help a little bit. Expect it. Expect that it will come at any time. From anyone you can possibly imagine. Expect that stumbling blocks, stones of offense, they will come. Brace yourself for it, and you won't be as jarred by it. Be ready for it, because it's the things that you're ready for, it's the things that you aren't ready for that hurt you the most. And you're like, man, I didn't see that coming. So Jesus says, it's impossible that no offenses should come. So someone might say to you, hey, no offense, but then they'll go on to say something terribly offensive, like I said in this video. I mean, how many times has someone said to you something along the lines of, hey, no offense, but there's kind of a reason you're single? Do people really say this? I've heard it, okay? That actually comes out of the oral cavities of human beings. People say that kind of stuff. You know, hey, no offense, but if you would just relax, you probably wouldn't struggle with infertility anymore. If you would just relax, you're just too stressed out. That's why you can't have a child. Oh my gosh, really? Don't say that. But here's the deal. As I tell you don't say that, I'm also telling you expect someone will say it to you. That expect that offenses will come. Hey, no offense, but black people? No offense, but white people? Fill in the blank. Expect that someone's going to say something ignorant. I don't even know how a person of color lives in America right now. I'm just going to be honest. Because ignorant crap spills out of white people's mouths a lot. Okay? And there's a lot of white people who are like, I don't know, I don't understand the issue. Clearly, because it just keeps happening. Jesus says, expect that offenses inevitably will come your way. Halloween night, went trick-or-treating with my kids and my wife. We took our 3 kids trick-or-treating. We're all dressed up as minor characters of Harry Potter. You know, they weren't like the major ones. They weren't like Harry and Hermione, because I was Hermione last year. And so, you know, just everybody was dressed up as a minor character. And our kids are 14, 12, and 10. And Zion, our oldest, is now, he's 14. He's like 5'11". He's like within an inch now of his 6-foot dad. And he's just loving every second of it as he's creeping up on me like a bad wedgie, okay? We actually have a line on the wall now. Here's Dad, and here's Zion. He's like 3/4 of an inch under me. He's like, one day. And I was like, well, when you're taller than me, I will shove you down, you know? So he's all tall now, and they're just great kids. And as soon as we left our house, my wife was mentioning to me as we got walking, she said, I think it was an article on Facebook, and she was like, I saw an article today someone had written, or a blog post that said, be nice to my 6-foot trick-or-treater. I was like, oh man, what an interesting thing to write, because I imagine a lot of parents have been hurt by mean things said to their kid who just happens to be disguised and they're a tall person. And so people say mean things to them, like, what are you doing? You're 6 foot tall. Why are you trick-or-treating? That kind of stuff. And it could be every other house in a neighborhood. And so we're walking along, and we go up and down several blocks. Not a lot of people have their lights on in our neighborhood, okay? It's just not. There's like 2 on a block, go to the next street. There's 3 on this block. We're definitely going down this street. There's 3 lights on. So we're going up and down blocks. Well, eventually we end up back on a path that we often walk as a family when it's warm. After dinner, we'll almost go for walks every day when it's nice out after dinner. And we have this several block path that we do, and we'll walk it 2 or 3 times. Well, there's one particular house along that way where every once in a while we might stop for a second and talk to a lady that lives there, but usually we'll just chat with her as we walk by, and it's usually pretty cordial and all that kind of stuff. And so, she recognizes us, knows us. Well, this time we're all disguised, and we're walking down the street, and she's talking to a friend on the front porch, and her light's on. Well, that means you got candy to give me, so I'm coming up to get a Snicker bar. And so we go, and our kids who are trick-or-treating, we're not. We wanted to. But we head that way, and she says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not giving out candy. And we're like, oh, okay. So we look, and across the street is the next light that's closest to us. So we start to cross the street, but as we turn our backs and head across the street, the one thing that I heard her say was, and by the way, trick-or-treating is for little kids. And I was pissed. I was like, she did not just make my 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and 10-year-old feel guilty about trick-or-treating. I went back and I spun kicked her. No, I didn't do that. I didn't even look back at her. I was just kind of like, I don't even know if Shannon heard that. And I didn't ask for several days. I finally remembered. And I was like, man, that ticked me off. And I knew it ticked me off because when I saw her in the community, like I often do, the first time after that, I looked back down and I was like, I'm not saying hi to her. She said something that I think could have hurt my kids' feelings. And I was ticked. I was offended. I didn't even see it coming. It was like that, not a big deal, really, kind of statement. It wasn't like she said, I want to burn your house to the ground. But it was a small thing that I wasn't expecting. And this is what Jesus is saying is, sometimes you're just randomly going to be jarred by things. So just always expect that people are going to be offensive. You're one of them. I'm one of them. People are going to offend one another. And C.S. Lewis, in his classic book, it's a fictional book called The Screwtape Letters. C.S. Lewis is an agnostic who became a follower of Jesus. And he was a scholar, an amazing mind. And he wrote this fictional book that all it is a series of letters written by a fictional, experienced demon who's writing letters to his less experienced nephew demon who's learning how to tempt someone, a teenage boy that he's been assigned to. And so his uncle Screwtape is writing to his nephew Wormwood. And it's letter after letter. And it's fictional, but it is really deep and insightful. Like, if I read it 10 years later, I'll be like, I didn't see all that. That's really amazing. And one of the things Uncle Screwtape writes this: domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which would appear quite harmless on paper, otherwise your words aren't offensive in themselves, but in such a voice, or at such a moment, that they are not far short of a punch in the face. The teenage boy that you're tempting must demand that all his utterances are to be taken at their face value and judged simply on the actual words, while at the same time judging all of his mother's utterances with the fullest and most oversensitive interpretation of the tone and the context and the suspected intention. Hence, from every quarrel that they have, they can both go away nearly convinced that they are both quite innocent. Once this habit is well established, you will have the delightful situation of a human saying things with the express purpose of offending and yet having a grievance when offense is taken. Just that humans begin to play with each other with their words, and it's the tones that they use and all that offend the other person. And their point is to offend by how they say it, but what they say couldn't be called into question, and it begins more arguments. And it's just truth that who are the people that are likely to offend you most? It's the people who are closest to you. It's your parents, it's your children, it's your spouse, it's your boyfriend, it's your girlfriend, it's your siblings. It's all these people. It's people that you grow up with. It's people you confide in. It's people that you partnered with to start that business. It's the person you sleep next to. That's why the movie was called Sleeping with the Enemy. It's because the people who are closest to you are the people who have the opportunity to severely offend you, to offend you the most. And you find the greatest hatred among people who were once close. Attorneys will tell you that the most venomous cases are found in divorce court, right? Because they used to be close. And so the offense is so much more grievous when it goes down. And so here's the strategy that I want to share from the first couple of chapters I read from this book that I would not recommend. So here's the strategy. This is the strategy against the trap that will inevitably come your way. It will inevitably be put in front of you by Satan. The opportunity to be offended and to be baited by this offense, it's simply this. Leave the offense in the trap. Walk around the trap and say, I just choose not to be offended, because it's taking the bait that leads to the anger and the woundedness and the choosing to not forgive. You know, the offense itself isn't deadly if it stays in the trap, but if we pick it up, if we consume it and we feed on it, that's when we become offended. I took offense at that. I'm now angry at that person. I took offense because she said to my trick-or-treating kids. I took offense because my father once told me when I was 12. I took offense, and we take that and we consume it, and that is when we become trapped. James 1 in the Bible says, everyone should be slow to become angry because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Slow your roll. Don't be so quick to be offended and to say, there's something I can be mad about, because it's a habit, isn't it? It becomes a habit to say when someone disses me in any kind of way, I become offended. And the offense is really just like the cheese that you put in a mouse trap for a mouse. The cheese in and of itself is okay until the mouse tries to eat it, and then snap, he's gone. He's trapped. So picture the offense, an offense or a stumbling block that's placed in front of you. Picture like many other traps of Satan, that this is a temptation. It's something that I can identify, I can reject, I can choose a route of escape, which God says He always provides. Okay? 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has overcome you except what is common to mankind. You're not going through any new temptation that wasn't going on in the first century, basically. It's just available through the internet now, okay? So same temptations, just different avenues. But God is faithful, and when you are tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can, disappears, it's a mystery. You'll never know what they say right there. It's so that you can endure it. So in this case, refuse to take the offense and to say, I'm just going to walk around that. I'm going to choose like water off a duck's back. I am just not going to be offended by that hurtful thing that person said to me. I'm just not going to. I mean, newsflash, people say things weird all the time to one another. You know, they do all the time. Sometimes people are going to say things to you that are potentially offensive, and this is what I'm challenging you to say, and this is the thing I've been trying to put into practice for the last couple of years, is to say, when someone says, no offense, but, or they drop some mean thing, that you would just say to yourself, I could be offended by that, but that person, they don't know me as well as they think they do. Over Thanksgiving meal, you're going to have an opportunity to say, I'm not going to be offended by that. They're remembering things from when I was a child. That's stuff from when I was a child. Like, I'm just not going to be offended by that. Or I could be offended by that, but I just disagree on this issue. I just disagree. I could be offended by that, but they're probably speaking out of their own woundedness. I could be, but I'm not. I'm going to choose to walk around that. And ultimately what you're saying is, I could be offended by that, but I'm going to walk around this trap, and Satan is not going to use this to ruin my day, ruin my health, make me lose sleep, make me bitter toward this person, make me reimagine this moment over and over throughout my week or life. And that has really been a helpful thing. For me, for 2 years now, I've been trying to remember to say, man, that person just said something really, really ignorant to me. Like, that was really offensive, but I'm going to choose not to be offended. I'm just going to walk around that and just not get angry with them about it and be like, no offense taken. I'm just not going to be angry. And that's helped me a lot, and it gave me kind of a vision for this message of, this has been practical for me, so I'm just going to share it with others, even though it's simple, and use this as preventative maintenance, if you will. This is preventative maintenance to say, here's proactive work, things that you can do in the future when those inevitable offenses come, to say, this might save me from having to forgive some people in the future because I choose to walk around the offense. This is a great verse. This is almost my theme verse for this morning when it comes to this. I'd challenge you to memorize this proverb. Proverbs 12:16 says this, fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent, those wise about the practical things of life, they overlook an insult. Like, whatevs. You know what? I'm just going to choose not to take the bait. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to harbor unforgiveness in my heart. I'm just going to walk around that. I'm not going to show my annoyance at once. Because again, it becomes a habit. But you can also make a habit of walking around the trap and saying, I'm just not going to be hurt. I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to become an offended person. Earlier this year, I was reading Stephen Covey's classic, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Man, I feel like I've been so effective since then. And so one of the people he quoted was Eleanor Roosevelt in his book. And it was a quote that I guess is famous. You know, I've seen memes on it and stuff now, but I'd never seen it till then. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And I think that applies so much to this, is the idea that also no one can hurt you, no one can offend you without your consent. You have to choose to take the bait. You have to choose to take the offense and say, okay, I'm going to get angry with you. And I'm going to harbor anger. I'm going to avoid you. I'm going to not like you. I'm going to defriend you. All that stuff. And you harbor unforgiveness. And Eleanor Roosevelt says, well, you really don't have to be offended by someone trying to make you inferior. You have to give your consent to feel inferior. Man, I don't want to become an easily offended, quick to become angry and make that a habit, because eventually that has circumstances that lead to consequences for my kids, my spouse, my friends, my Christian brothers and sisters in Christ. That stuff is toxic and affects the people around me. So I'm trying to choose not to take the bait. And here's the deal. Our response often determines our destiny. If you choose to walk around the offense, man, then you can go on and keep living a day of peace. If you get in a habit of this, you can live a life of peace. Or if you take the bait, you end up in Satan's trap, and you often end up living a day of pain and anger and bitterness, or a life of pain and anger and bitterness. Now, the bad news is, as I've alluded to, this has worked sometimes for me, okay? It hasn't always worked for me. There's times where I've definitely been like, man, I'm so glad I have that thought. I've chosen to not be offended by things people have done or said. There's other times where I haven't, and I've looked back like, dang it, I took the bait. Like, I'm angry at that person now, and now I have to drop the F-bomb. Like, now I'm harboring unforgiveness, and I got to go through the problem of forgiving people. Because in Mark 11:25, Jesus said this, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them. Do they have to ask for forgiveness? They don't. And it's not for their good, it's for your good that you would forgive them. So if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins. Okay, so the grace that you would or could receive from God is conditional on you forgiving others. It might be forgiving someone who isn't even alive anymore. They can't ask you for forgiveness. You have to choose to forgive. It doesn't mean that what they did was right or okay. It is helping you to forgive them, and then God can release grace into your life as you're dealing it out to others. So here's the deal. On the opposite of forgiveness, on the flip side, pride is an enemy of forgiveness. And pride says, I'm okay. It's okay. I don't need to forgive. I'm fully justified in my response because they have hurt me, they have offended me, or whatever. Pride will keep you from admitting your true condition, that you are trapped in an offense, that you are stuck there. And you will never change the way that you think when you think everything is fine. You'll never make a change in that situation. Pride causes you to view yourself as the victim. That's how people stay trapped. You continue to focus on the wrong that was done to you, and you stay imprisoned in the trap. I was mistreated. I was misjudged. Therefore, I'm justified in my response. But forgiveness means, as we've tried to repeat several times, it means to release. And ultimately, it isn't releasing the offender. It's releasing the offended. It's releasing you from the trap. When you forgive, you release yourself from the snare of Satan. It releases you from Satan's trap, and you no longer have to walk around offended. Unforgiveness has one prisoner, and that's the offended person. It's not the offender. And so to forgive means to wipe the slate clean, to pardon, to cancel a debt. It means that you give up the right to hurt someone for hurting you. It's saying, I give up my right and my desire to retaliate. I give that right up. I relinquish my right to retaliate. Because the world says, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, right? The world says, you call me names, I'm going to call you names. The world says, if you damage my property, I'm going to damage your property. You know, if you gossip about me, I'm going to gossip about you. But if Jesus is your leader, then you live by Jesus' code. At least you try to. And Jesus says, man, I want you to forgive others and relinquish your right to retaliate against those who have offended you. Cancel the debt and free yourself from the trap. Romans 12:18 says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Okay, when I was in college, across the hall, I went to college in Kentucky, just across the Ohio River, and I was a freshman, and across the hall, there was a guy that was from Toledo, where I grew up. His name is Eric, and his roommate was a guy named Dave. And I didn't know Dave that much, but they were funny. They were both a couple of nerds, like just straight up nerds, man. And before orientation was even over, they were juniors, I think I was a freshman, and they turned their dorm room completely into Bruce Wayne's Batcave. Okay? It was pretty cool. Like, you'd walk in and be like, whoa! And there's just little rooms, but they worked hard on this. It was like, how much time and effort and money did you put into making this a little bat cave? And they were fun people, really nice guys, but straight up nerds, man, just straight up nerds. Sometimes we'd hear them yelling stuff, just being silly over in their dorm room across the hall, and me and my roommate would just be cracking up at things they yelled out loud, and we even adopt some of those things as sayings and stuff. And so Dave lived over there with the guy that I already knew, whose name was Eric. Well, Dave also was a real musical type. Like instruments, he led, he could lead choirs, he could lead bands, that kind of stuff. But he was like a nerdy musical dude, really, like straight up. And the funny thing was, he was dating a girl named Lucinda, who was this really pretty girl who was a singer. And I remember a lot of the freshman guys at the time being like, how did Dave end up with Lucinda? Like, they just don't go together. Like, he looks like and is a nerd. And then there's Lucinda, who is pretty. And it was one of those things that Dave was just such an awesome guy. He was just such a nice, likable, Christ-like dude. Well, eventually he and Lucinda got married, and eventually had 3 beautiful daughters. And I, kind of typically with somebody you might know from another place, we would just see updates about their life and family on Facebook, and see what was going on in their lives. And last year, about this time, November 13th, 2016, Dave was driving home from Indianapolis on I-69, and in the car with him were 2 of his 3 daughters and his mother. And sometime right before like 4 a.m., they hit a deer. And it was like, Sunday morning, crazy early, they hit a deer. They pulled off to the side of the road, on the shoulder of the road, and they were waiting for roadside assistance to show up. And along came a 19-year-old dude named Mason Hartkey, who was intoxicated, who was driving, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and his pickup truck slammed into their car that was parked along the shoulder of the road. And my friend Dave, who was 46 years old, was killed. His daughter that was in the car, 17-year-old high school student, she was a singer, was killed. His mom, Ruth Ann, who was 74, was killed. Josie Reinhardt, another one of his daughters, who was 18, was the sole survivor of the wreck from their car. The drunk driver, he lived, and he was 19 years old. And so seeing, man, the Facebook, we had a picture of the 4 that were in the car that was hit by Mason Hartkey. So this is Dave that we went to college with. This is his daughter that was a singer that was killed. This is the one that survived, and there's Dave's mom. And man, seeing on Facebook a grieving wife and mom, just heartbreaking. Like to see the things that she posts, old pictures of Lucinda, the mom, with her daughter, pictures of her daughter singing. They were coming back from an event in Indianapolis that she had just sang at in Lucas Oil Stadium. And just crazy to see that. A couple weeks after the accident, Lucinda, the mom, posted, "Grief is swallowing me whole. Even though I know and believe everything is good, I would give anything for one more minute in her presence." And there's other posts that would appear like this, where she would allude to Psalm 34:18, which says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." And one time she posted an article that had the mug shot of Mason Hartke on it, and it posted this picture of him, and it said, "Psalm 34:18 for all of us, including Mason Hartke." And every once in a while she would post something that would allude to the driver of the vehicle, who was in jail at the time awaiting trial. And it would be something like that that was clearly not venomous. Well, last week in Indiana, just last week, now Mason Hartke's 20 years old, and he had originally pleaded not guilty, but last week he pleaded guilty, and he was sentenced to 15 years, 5 years per count, and actually 4.5 of those are probation. So he's going to spend 10.5 years in prison. And Lucinda, the mom, and Josie, the daughter who survived the crash, each took the stand during this trial last week. And basically said, Lucinda, when she got on the stand, she said, she turned to Mason. She said, "Mason, I want you to know that you are loved and that you're forgiven. And I want to thank you for taking responsibility for what you did." And then the daughter, who was in the car, got up and she took the stand. And she looked over at Mason Hartke and she said, "I 100% forgive you." And she got up off the witness stand and she walked over to Mason Hartke and she hugged him. Dude, everyone lost it. I mean, those two wept hugging each other. The whole courtroom wept. The prosecuting attorney said, "I had never seen anything like this." They called a recess immediately afterward because people were losing it. People went outside to cry and to get away to get their composure and not to just cry in front of each other with ugly face crying, you know? And they all come back together, and it was just crazy. And afterward, Josie was interviewed, and she said, "Man, I do forgive him." She said, and that not only helped him, but it helped me through it, just knowing that I did the right thing. One of the reporters that was there, a local reporter, said, "Man, when she hugged him, everybody lost it. You could see the remorse. I mean, he was in tears. She was in tears." She said it kind of showed you what forgiveness and real love is all about. Well, no media, video cameras, anything like that were allowed in the trial. But the daughter who wasn't in the vehicle, the third daughter, I think she's the youngest, she, I think discreetly, snapped a picture of the hug from where she was sitting in the courtroom. And there's a picture of Josie hugging the dude who's 20 years old who killed 3 people from that family. And when she posted it, the girl who took the picture, she posted it on Facebook. And when she posted it on Facebook, all she put in the caption with it was this: "Love is louder." It's a normal, non-Jesus thing to say, "I'm going to harbor offense, I'm going to harbor bitterness, I'm going to make that person the target of my anger. I'm going to be venomous. I will never say anything good or nice about that person. I will harbor offense. I will harbor bitterness in my heart." But they say love is louder. It makes a bigger impact in your own life and in other people's lives if you will choose to forgive and to love. Love is a verb and forgiveness is an action. It's not just a feeling. And so this morning, what we want to do is some of you have been making courageous decisions throughout the series to forgive or begin the process of forgiveness. And a couple weeks ago, I asked you to make a list of people that you would need to forgive and to start praying about them. And I said that might be one person, it might be none. It could be 7, 8, 9, 10 people. And most of us will never get a chance to express our forgiveness in that dramatic way, sitting on a stand or whatever, and in a tangible way. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you just a small, tangible way to say, I'm choosing to forgive. I'm starting or continuing the process of forgiveness. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you come on up. The band's going to play a couple worship songs. We've got a bucket right here, and we've got a bunch of stones that are empty along the sides here and a bunch of Sharpies. And we're just going to ask you to come up and write down the name of the person that you are in the process of forgiving or that you have forgiven. Write the name down and just drop it in the bucket. And if you got 3 people, take 3 rocks. If you got 10 people, there's plenty of rocks up here. Take them and just spend your time writing their name down. And you can write the name. We're not gonna show them, list them, or anything like that. Write the person's first name, or write dad, or write mom, or write the person who did this. And just write that. And it's going to be loud, like I've warned the band. This is going to be loud because you're going to drop it in a galvanized bucket, and it's going to go bang. And the reason for that is because love is louder. We're saying this is going to be a tangible act of worship, and this is the sound of forgiveness. You're going to write that name, and you're just going to drop it in there, bang, with this tangible moment to say, I'm releasing myself. I'm moving on. I'm dropping the F-bomb. Boom. And I'm just going to drop it right there in this bucket. And so we're going to transition to right now the band playing 2 worship songs. Come up at any time during these 2 songs, anytime, and write the names down that you need to write down and drop them in the bucket.